Hi and welcome to Empower India Foundation podcast. This is Muhammed Sabith. In this podcast, I talk about a recent article published by Empower India Foundation under the title Islamophobic Disinformation in India. Because of a number of reasons, particularly the rise of Hindutva forces into power in 2014 and in 2019, Islamophobia has become rampant across India. We have numerous examples where Muslims in India face online abuses, discrimination, physical harassments, and deadly mob attacks. In an article published in a leading global advocacy group, Human Rights Watch, Jayashree Bajoria, who is a senior researcher for South Asia region for the group, pointed out how the recent vilification of Indian Muslims for the spread of COVID-19 simply highlighted an existing reality of anti-Muslim propaganda. She argued that the so-called Corona Jihad propaganda was only the latest manifestation of Islamophobia in India, which has been in the making for years. In the past years, hate crimes targeting Muslims have increased in India significantly. Not long ago, renowned social activist Harsh Mandar wrote that the country was witnessing a wave of hate crimes in different parts of the country. He wrote about this after he and a group of other activists visited families of victims of hate crimes, including lynching, in 12 different states. It is worth to notice that, unlike in many other countries like Britain, there is no official data about the hate crimes in India. This makes it difficult to know the exact volume of the crime committed in the name of religious affiliation and other identities. Additionally, the police and other law enforcement agencies fail to invoke important and relevant penal provisions in hate crime cases. There are widespread prejudices, misunderstanding, and bias prevailing in India not only about Muslims but also about their faith, their lifestyles, and their organizations. In India, disinformation and hate crimes against Muslims are being committed in the name of co-protection, the so-called love jihad, and for several other reasons. Since the beginning of the pandemic, they were wrongly targeted for the spread of the disease under the new phrase Corona Jihad. However, Indian mainstream media coverage on these anti-Muslim disinformation and hate crimes are far from sufficient to create a strong public opinion in favor of the victims. Even though there are several factors that contribute to the anti-Muslim violence in India, what stands unique is the role of misinformation, or more correctly, disinformation, in most of those incidents. Shakuntala Banerjee and Ram Bhatt, two researchers from London School of Economics, or LSE, explain how disinformation and misinformation are two completely different terms. They said, quote, "While misinformation can be information that is simply inaccurate, disinformation is usually linked to powerful, covert political actors who produce and share systematically distorted information in order to gain results that will favor their political goals." Unquote. Indian fact-check website Alt News recently analyzed more than 20 anti-Muslim fake news stories that went viral in recent past. The analysis pointed out that these fake viral reports were a result of systematic and organized attempt to target Muslims and Christians. According to the analysis, these fake reports were made to make Hindus both fear and hate Muslims. In India, the governments also promote Islamophobic disinformation through either its actions or its inaction. For example, an investigation conducted by the news website Article 14 revealed how the government actions or lack of appropriate actions fueled hate and crime against Muslims during the pandemic. The report was titled as How India's Government Set Off a Spiral of Islamophobia. It was written by Ritika Jain. Another recent study carried out by a South Asian Dalit progressive group called Equality Labs concluded that hate speech and disinformation targeting Muslims run rampant across Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, and other social media platforms. Professor Shakuntala Banerjee and Dr. Ram Bhatt of the London School of Economics give us shocking details of the spread of deliberately produced fake messages in India through social media platforms. They also explained how such messages are connected with various anti-Muslim attacks in India. Interestingly, the LSE researchers claimed that the spike in anti-Muslim disinformation has little to do with ignorance or digital illiteracy. Instead, their survey found that the spread of fake news in India, which resulted in mob lynching and other forms of physical violence, was largely done out of reasons of prejudice and ideology rather than ignorance or digital illiteracy. Their research into hate speech and misinformation on WhatsApp suggested that, quote, upper and middle caste Hindu social media groups with an investment in the ideology of Hindu supremacy knowingly produce and share disinformation targeted against Muslims, unquote. They also argued, quote, the naive notion that reporting or uncovering the truth and the facts will mitigate violence and undermine prejudice needs to be banished, unquote. The researchers further argued that the increase in disinformation and hate speech in India runs as a well-oiled machine. Quote, the BJP, RSS and Sangh Parivar campaign of producing hate and inciting violence against Muslims in India runs as a well-oiled machine that has an internal complexity and leaves the ruling party with plenty of scope for plausible deniability, unquote. Professor Shakuntala Banerjee and Dr. Ram Bhatt further discussed the role of pro-Hindutva journalists and news anchors as well as the Hindutva IT cells in manufacturing and circulating violent disinformation against Indian Muslims. They found that both mainstream and social media play important roles in spreading anti-Muslim disinformation. The London-based Indian academics explained how disinformation around Muslims is being propagated in different vicious Islamophobic imaginaries, such as a health and hygiene problem, a threat to national security, or a danger to other communities through affluence and population growth. Senior journalist Shivam Vij says that India's anti-Muslim fake news factories are following the anti-Semitic playbook. He wrote this in a recent article published in the news website The Print. He compared the increasing disinformation campaign against Indian Muslims with a similar campaign against European Jews centuries ago. Anti-Jew disinformation campaign eventually led to massacre of Jews in Europe. Shivam Vij demanded efforts to stop what he called the anti-Muslim fake news factories. Explaining how such fake news factories work, Shivam Vij wrote, quote, fake news creators first Google some images or videos of Muslims beating up other Muslims in Pakistan or Bangladesh. Then they are spread on WhatsApp groups and social media with text added to falsely claim that a Muslim had beaten up a Hindu. The flow of such fake news is inconsistent and persistent. It serves the purpose of slowly and steadily spreading hate against Muslims, unquote. Such fake news also want the Hindu majority to see the Muslims as violent, scary, and unreasonable. Shivam Vij also observed that such consistent production of anti-Muslim fake news serves another important purpose, as it helps in shifting attention away from the Narendra Modi government's failures. So, now, what's the way forward? What can be done to counter and ultimately defeat the anti-Muslim disinformation ecosystem that is both widespread and harmful? The past experiences and serious studies on the topic suggest that a multi-level approach is required to counter rising anti-Muslim attitude and violence in India. This includes both short-term and long-term strategies. According to researchers Shakuntala Banerjee and Ram Bhatt, the short-term solutions include a far stronger commitment from mainstream media organizations governments and social media companies on ideas about civil and human rights. First, the Indian mainstream media and government should recognize that multiple forms of Islamophobic rhetoric do exist in India. According to Professor Shakuntala Banerjee and Dr. Ram Bhatt, the long-term solutions include the building of a culture of anti-racism, historical awareness, and critical media literacy from childhood upwards. Finally, the communication researchers also demand that anti-racist researchers and ethical journalists should look at the political history of Indian disinformation. They also want these influencers to critically examine whose political interests are actually served by the sophisticated and systematic sharing of community-transmitted disinformation that target Indian Muslims. Thank you.